Hi, my name is Jordan Beatty, and my presentation is over the fantasy realm as a reflection of trauma. The book I'm using to support my argument is The Census Taker by China Miéville. I believe it is an example of the externalization of the main protagonist's childhood trauma as opposed to a fantasy world. My first point that supports my claim is called the trauma theory. This is the idea that trauma psychologically disturbs a person that has had a traumatic background or maybe a traumatic event happen to them. It could give the affected person flashbacks to the traumatic event or events. It could also affect their memory. It could block out memories and also distort them. Not only is this theory popular in the field of psychology, but the trauma theory also interests a lot of literary scholars. My next point encompasses trauma as used in the fantasy genre. During my research, I found a widely respected psychiatrist named Bruno Bettelheim. He worked with emotionally disturbed children and was very, very well known for his research. In his book, The Uses of Enchantment, the Meaning and Importance of Fairy Tales, he talks about the way children use fairy tales to cope and deal with trauma. He says isolating and separating the disparate and confusing aspects of the child's experience into opposites and projecting them onto individuals. He says that for kids, it is easier to confront chaos and disorder in a fictional way. Bettelheim also talks about Tolkien and his focus on constellation. Tolkien sets up his book in a straightforward way. Fantasy, recovery, escape, and finally consolation, creating a happy ending in his fairy tales. The happy ending a child creates in his or her mind allows for the child to live in this world they constructed without any consequences. Fantasy, for a lot of disturbed people, can be an outlet and coping mechanism because of its otherworldly aspects and then having a happy ending. Fantasy is compelling to a lot of people. The genre is often used to portray real trauma or traumatic events. La Vida e Bella, 1997, Labyrinth, Chronicles of a Disappearance, 1996, Underground, 1995, Divine Intervention, 2002, and Turtles Can Fly, 2004, are all examples of films that use fantasy to portray real events. Several of these won fantasy awards. The films were about the Holocaust, the Spanish War, and other violent events, all depicted and told through a fantasy lens. Filmmakers use fantasy to contribute to the unsettling nature of the events and trauma. Fantasy is also used to represent an in-between or transitional state between reality and real life. My last point is Miéville's relationship with metaphors and sentimentality. In an interview with the Wisconsin Press, Miéville said, "I think sentimentality has a feeling of the performance to it, and that is so cheapening. So I think even if one trusts or believes that one's own emotional drives are sincere, insofar as that chimera means anything, the danger of that not being communicated is strong, and one wants very much to communicate the sincerity of emotion. And if that means erring on the side of restraint, then so be it, I think." In this interview, he talks about his use of trains in his novel King Brat. He talks about his literal and metaphorical use of trains in railways. Miéville prefers his writing to be indirect. He doesn't talk about emotions or blatantly tell us the meaning behind his writing. This is all intentional. He believes this adds depth and experience to his writing. In conclusion, I believe This Census Taker is an example of real problems and mental health in the fantasy genre. The boy displayed examples of mental disturbance throughout the story. And after my research and figuring out real problems are often displayed in fantasy, this supported my hypothesis. I believe that one of Miéville's purposes in writing this book was to indirectly show us the struggles of a kid from a broken home and a broken mind.